Hello, Gaston County. Welcome to episode number 172, if you can believe it, of Gaston's Great, a podcast highlighting some of the great things happening in and around Gaston County. I'm your host, Stephen Long, and we're coming to you once again from the international headquarters of GSM Services right here in downtown Gastonia. We have another great guest today. I'm very happy to have Jennie Stultz on the podcast today, who is a woman of many talents and been involved with many things, most notably as a former mayor of Gastonia, past executive director of Gaston County Education Foundation, among many other community-focused endeavors. Jennie is a longtime friend and someone committed to our local community. I'm looking forward to hearing about her leadership and community journey. So, Jennie, it's great to have you on, and welcome to the podcast.
I'm delighted to be number 172.
Well, we got you here as fast as we could.
That's all right. It was worth waiting for.
Absolutely. So, Jennie, the first question we'd like to ask for our listeners is simply just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything you'd like to share, and then we'll get into your leadership and community-focused journey.
Well, I think a lot of people really don't know my original background and how I got started.
Okay.
My dad and granddad started one of the first car dealerships here in Gastonia in post-war.
Okay.
World War II. And the way they'd go get cars is they'd put 4 people in a car and drive to Detroit and pick up 3 cars or 4 cars and drive them back.
Bring them back.
So it was Thomas Motor Sales. And so I grew up in the car business with my Uncle Redbird, who a lot of people know, and my dad and my granddad. And so I was a post-war baby. Daddy came home from war, and Mama was engaged to somebody else, and she fell in love with Daddy. And
oh, that's funny.
So
I knew that story.
Well, she broke an engagement, and they got married, and so I was the first to come along out of 4. And in the early 50s, my granddaddy had a chance to buy some land way out in the country, for $10,000. And so he bought the land from O. Max Gardner, who had been a former governor of North Carolina, and he developed Thomas Acres and Gardner Park.
Okay, way out in the country, right?
Yeah, way out in the country.
That's
in fact,
funny,
after church, we would ride way out in the country to go see my granddaddy. So it started off with Thomas Acres, and all the streets were named after family members. There's Thomas Trail, there's Ruby Lane after my grandmother, some other ones. And then as Gardner Park got developed, Sandy Lane was named after my sister, and for some reason, I never got a street named after me, but, I lived through it. It was all right.
Survived.
So, I grew up in the car business and the house business, and we never knew what car we were riding in, and we never knew what house we were going to be living in because Daddy would sell it out from under us and we'd move again. So change was pretty much a part of my life. So that was really how I got started, and grew up in Gardner Park. And was a Gardner Park kid and ate off the lunch trucks that were building houses. And
well, listen, I
grew up in a great neighborhood.
I grew up at Sherwood Elementary, Greer Junior High, Ashbrook, and man, when I went to Ashbrook, I developed so many friends that lived in Gardner Park.
Yeah,
and spent a lot of time in Gardner Park. In fact, my wife grew up on Leaf Smoke Drive, Jason Drive, and then Leaf Smoke Drive. So I guess that was officially Gardner Acres.
That was Gardner Acres,
right?
Because ironically, in 1964, I had really had a crush on this really shy guy named David Stultz, and he never would ask me out. And so finally I asked him out, and I asked him to go to the Shrine Bowl football game with me because my daddy was a Shriner. And so it was a big deal, and we went to the Shrine Bowl football game, and my daddy died of a heart attack that day on our first date.
Yikes.
And Daddy was 41. And I was 17. I had a 14-year-old sister, an 8-year-old brother, and a 5-year-old sister. So my mom was left as a 40-year-old widow with 4 young children. So 6 weeks later, my granddaddy died of a heart attack. So the whole development company was gone in 6 weeks' time. So my Uncle Redbird, who loved cars, was stuck with developing land. And so Gardner Park basically ended at the end of Gardner Park Drive,
right.
And then Gardner Acres began.
Yep.
So that's where that started.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, gosh, I didn't know that. That's it's a lot to grow up a little faster than maybe you had to, huh?
Well, that was a lot of what molded me, I think, as a person that a lot of people don't know.
Well, so what about the story with David after?
Well, the story with David after was the fact that David's mother, they lived on Gardner Park Drive too. They lived down the street, but David's mother was really not happy at all that we were dating because I was a wild girl. I was that wild Thomas girl. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't mess around, but I had a red convertible and I blew the horn.
Oh, okay.
And that made me
crazy.
The wild girl. And she had every imagination.
Girls didn't have convertibles, huh?
Oh, yeah, red convertible, blowing the horn, blowing the music loud. She was trouble. And she had all these visions that David would marry the homecoming queen.
Yeah.
And he married the one that got wittiest. So they were moving to Florida.
Well, that's better for long term, though.
His dad got transferred to Florida, and so they said, "You're moving to Florida." And David said, "No, I'm not." And by this time, we're sophomores in college.
Okay.
And they said, "You're moving to Florida." And he said, "No, I don't think so." And they said, "Yeah, you are." So we eloped.
Oh.
We were 19 years old, and we went to York, South Carolina, and got married. And our friends May and Royce Robinson went with us.
Oh, wow.
They were off in school, too. And they said it wouldn't work, and we'll be married 59 years in February.
Oh, well, good for you. Wow.
So that wild girl did all right.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Officially, our first real date, my wife asked me to.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was just too dumb to see the writing on the wall, Imagine that, Rachel. And that was 30 years. Well, actually, that date was 35 years ago. So she's put up with a lot for
but it works.
a long. Yes. Yeah, I'm very, very fortunate.
Some women have good taste, so they know what they're doing.
I'll let that one lie right there.
Of course, he was
Janet
the
will
quiet.
Janet will probably listen to this.
He was the quiet guy, the quiet, shy guy, and I was the out there person. So he's reeled me in quite a few times in those few years.
Well, you know what? I find a lot of that extrovert and introvert thing can work, actually, right?
It frightens me to think of some of the guys that I dated.
See a lot
if
of
I
that,
had married them. It's the old Garth Brooks, thank God for unanswered prayers kind of thing.
It's funny how things it's funny how things do work out. So again, first of all, I've known you for a long time. I've been involved in our community for a long time, so I know a lot about your history in the community, your some of your professional career and how it ties in with some of your community work. So just maybe what we'd like to talk about here is just kind of leadership. How does community play into your mission, your journey? So can maybe talk a little bit about where along the line and what inspired you to connect those things together, and then how did that play in? Is that a fair question? I'm not a great, question, but so that's what we want to hear about.
But, as I talked about growing up with a lot of change, including, Daddy's work, but also losing a father and being the oldest of four and taking on that responsibility, that was life-changing. And then being a bride when you're 19 years old. And people say, well, how did you manage to stay married? And I said, we were too poor to split up, and neither one of us wanted to go back home, so we had to make up.
Yeah.
But during my daddy's short life, which was only 41 years, I never knew him when he wasn't helping somebody.
Okay.
There was always somebody at the door needing help, and Daddy was helping them in a million different ways. And I think inadvertently he taught me that we needed to help other people. So as I went into high school, I was the chairman of the pep club. I know you're surprised at that. I was always volunteering, and without even realizing what volunteering really was at that point in time.
Right.
And as I became a young mother, I was interested in how my child was being cared for when I was working, and so I started working at a daycare center.
Okay.
I had gotten a degree in medical records, and when David went back to school, he promised his parents that he would finish school. Well, we moved to Asheville, and I couldn't get a job in medical records, so I was a secretary at a beer distributorship. And the way I got to work was we only had one car, so the guy who drove the Michelob keg truck came to pick me up in his truck.
That's funny.
And they put an office chair. OSHA would die at this, but they put an office chair in this like milk truck kind of keg truck, and that's how I got to work.
That's funny. It's kind of like my carpool, the way we were transported to school. We were talking about that before we started recording. Yeah, you couldn't do that today. No
well, how many kids could you cram in the back
Oh
of the
man,
car?
we had that classic, Griswold station wagon, man, with the rear facing seats in the back. I know Kurt Voorhees and I would always try to to call that out, and so we could sit in the way back and just do whatever we did back then.
Well, when I came back home, I was working for Orthopedic Hospital.
Okay.
And then I worked for Tom Eford for a while. And the funny thing about Tom Eford was that I was not a good typist. And his secretary had been a paralegal. And he wanted me to type a document one day on a IBM Selectric typewriter that had the little ball with the letters on it.
Oh, yeah.
And he was an attorney, so he expected this document to be signed with multiple copies of carbons. And I'm hunting and pecking, finding the letters. He said, "You can't type worth a damn, can you?" And I said, "No."
I could hear Tom saying
I'm
that.
I'm a love goddess. And could not believe that I said that to an elder boss of mine. And he started laughing and he couldn't stop. So to this day, he calls me love goddess.
Oh, that's good.
I've had a few jobs, obviously.
Yeah.
But then I got involved with children, so I went back and got a degree in early childhood.
Okay.
And taught preschool for 17 years and became director of children's ministries at First United Methodist Church. And that's when I got recruited to serve on the Family Services Board and on the United Way campaign.
That's how that starts, right?
The other types of things that actually were related to my job.
Right.
And from then on, I never had to interview for another job. I was recruited for jobs. So one day, Becky Carter and Sandy Rankin, who were running Gastonia Clean City at that time, asked me to lunch. And if somebody asked you to lunch, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And they said, "We're both retiring."
What's the ask? Yeah. What's the ask?
We're retiring. We want you to take our place. And I said, "Well, I'm a preschool teacher." And they said, "Yeah, but you're involved in the community. You're the right person. We want you to take that job." So I went to work for Gastonia Clean City that ended up being Keep Gastonia Beautiful, which grew me into other organizations and be involved with the chamber. And
was that about the time frame when the All-America City thing came about, or was that later?
Actually, Gastonia became an All-America City when I was in high school, actually, but it was really something that was precipitated by Marshall Roush and Leon Schneider and T. Jeffers in 1963.
Okay.
When I
had forgotten that.
They, integrated the schools and the restaurants and the movie theaters long before the federal government required it. And so that was the first All-America City. Then when I ended up being mayor, one of the things I said is that we need to be an All-America City.
Gotcha.
So that's how the next phase started.
I do remember that. I mean, that was obviously a big deal. I mean, I remember that whole process and what a big deal that was. But before we move on, she mentioned a typewriter. Have you ever seen a typewriter, Rachel? You know what a typewriter is? Okay. I was just curious.
My husband still has one in his office.
Well, one of the funny things about when I went off to college, I'm old enough that's what this was pre-computers. So my parents gave me a typewriter to take off to college with me, and I used it for a year or two. Sure. And then at NC State, we did have an on-campus linked computer system. That was the first one ever at NC State. It was an engineering, connected system. You probably had
a floppy disk
at
some point, yeah.
And then I got a Radio Shack, something, and we had the big 5x5 or whatever those were, floppy disk. Yeah, that was. I thought I was hot stuff, right?
Oh, you were. You were carrying your whole life in this little card.
Yeah, that's funny to think now, and then what we have in our pockets now compared to that. So
because we were some of the first people in Gastonia to have a television set.
Oh yeah.
And the screen was like 12 by 12 or something like that.
Yeah. So, all right. You touched on a good bit of things. So who or what inspired you to make that link? And so when they sat down with you at lunch that day, I'm going to assume that kind of sent you on a journey toward being mayor later, I would assume. So how did what got you? What kind of said, this is what I want to do. Community is important, or was it just the volunteering back in high school, and that was just part of what you did?
Unbeknownst to me, it was track that I was taking that I didn't know that I was on.
Sure. I think that happens more often than we think.
Yeah, and you can identify with this. Sometimes you end up being the person who gets tagged to serve on every nonprofit board.
Sure.
And every fundraising campaign. And so I got involved with so many different things because I had so many interests.
Yeah.
But in the process of running a volunteer organization and encouraging people not to litter and to recycle and to plant trees, then you ended up, working on a volunteer base, getting people enthused. It's kind of like Tom Sawyer painting the fence. You had to get people enthused about picking up trash or recycling or doing any of those environmental type things. So I spent a lot of time in schools, a lot of time doing public programs, just talking trash. And so in doing that, I didn't realize what I was doing, but I was sending a message out about caring about your community.
Yeah.
And as that happened, and then I got more involved with city activities because the city manager would think of something else that I needed to do because we were the happy folks. If we made a report at city council, we were the good folks. We were bringing an award or some kind of recognition or bringing volunteers. So, then when Sister Cities came along, I ended up finding that I was doing Keep Gastonia Beautiful and Sister Cities and community involvement. And so through the city, I was doing a lot of work. And people actually didn't look at me as a city employee. They saw me as a nonprofit director, which I was. But I burned out. I just flat burned out.
Oh, that's easy to do.
Doing all that at the same time. And so I just decided that, my city work had just burned me out and I needed to look for something else. And Loretta Dodgen and Melinda Lowry called me and asked me to come work for them. But in addition, the National Keep America Beautiful program called me and wanted me to be a national trainer. So I traveled all over the country talking trash and helping other communities be Keep America Beautiful affiliates. So I was doing all that. That was all working pretty well. And I got a phone call one day to go meet with some members of the chamber, some community leaders. I thought that was kind of odd, and I went to the upstairs boardroom, and I look around the room, and it's the who's who of Gastonia, and they're all sitting around the table. And I'm sitting at the head of the table thinking,
uh-oh,
what's this about? And I said, and so they said, you know why you're here? And I said, I have no idea why I'm here. And they said, we want you to run for mayor. And I said, well, for some reason you may not understand.
Is it of Gastonia?
Yeah, I said, I'm a preschool teacher, trash lady.
Yeah.
I mean, that was my track. And I said, you must have me confused with someone. And they said, no, we want you to run. And Jit Garland had been our very beloved mayor we had loved for so long, and he had lost an election. And so the person that had filled his space was in office at that time, and this group said, we want you to run for mayor. And I said, but I'm not
a politician,
like everybody says.
Yeah.
But they said, that's why. That's why. You don't have any other motive other than to do something good for the community. Yeah. So I said, just like anything else, I said, well, I'll give that a try. Sure, I'll give that a try. Well, interestingly enough, every child that I had taught in preschool was old enough to vote.
Oh, that's interesting.
And every parent and every person I'd picked up trash with or planted a tree with or whose board I sat on knew what I stood for. I didn't have to sell myself as a person. They knew who I was. So people that were watching campaigns watched mine happen because I was right in the middle of it. But people said, you should have seen the momentum that was built by the people who wanted you to be mayor.
Yeah.
And as I ride by Martha Rivers Park, and I remember holding a fire hose with a prisoner from Dallas, making that rubber flooring on the Martha Rivers Park together in my Mayor Jennie shirt. Those are the kinds of things that happened. So it built the momentum of being proud about your community. So that was my whole mantra, a vote for city pride.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And
yeah, it's interesting to me. Yeah, so many things happen that way, right? I mean, people ask us often, not often, but occasion about, well, how did your business go from this to that? Or why did you do that? I said, well, actually, we just do things. Everybody wants to hear that there was some grand plan, that we planned this years ago and step 1, 2, 3, and all these things happened exactly like we planned out. That's not how most things happen. It's just people caring and doing things. That's how community things happen. And it's
people's expectations too. And then they look to you with their expectations. And that's what was so surprising to me. And I can remember radio stations in Charlotte said, some crazy woman over in Gastonia thinks we're picking on her over here on these radio stations, which they were.
They were, absolutely.
In fact,
they were.
Your brother was one of the ones that said, get that guy on Fox off, the weather guy, Mark Mathis. Joel called me late one night and said, you got to get that guy fired. Well, the guy got fired, and everybody thought I had done it. Yeah, but it's because he had done something else stupid.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was that people started feeling proud about their community, and that's how the All America City thing started.
Also, that's something that just doesn't happen overnight either. It takes time. I mean, I think we're still feeling the benefit of that today, actually.
Well, and the interesting thing about All America City was that it doesn't tout being the most perfect city.
Oh, sure.
To be in All America City, you have to tell 3 critical issues that are going on in your community that the grassroots community has worked to solve. Nothing that government has done. It was something that the grassroots community had done. So we told the story of the Greater Gaston Boys and Girls Club and what it was doing for young kids. We told the story of the Literacy Council, and we took a new reader who had just learned to read. And then we talked about the community watch programs and how we were taking care of each other. Now, the first year we went was in 1997, and we did not win. And Barbara Voorhees and I had to go to bed after that. We were so depressed. But it wasn't our time. Yeah. Because when I got elected in 1999, 6 months later, we were walking up Main Street as an All-America City. So it was the right time at that point. And so we celebrated what the grassroots community had done.
Right. So up to that point in your time in politics, for lack of a better phrasing, I mean, what are some of your biggest lessons, leadership lessons or community lessons? Just what can you think something that really comes to mind that you look back and go, wow, that really hit home, or that was something that I gained out of that experience?
Well, the first misnomer I think that people think about leadership is that it's a popularity contest, and it's anything but. Because when you're making decisions, you know that not everybody's going to be happy
Correct.
About that.
Yep.
And as mayor, I was a tiebreaker. So there were a lot of times that I had to make the decision that ultimately affected other people. And I think one of the people that I made the angriest is an older man whose street name we changed because we had mutual streets of the same name. And because of the 911, if somebody had an emergency,
could be a problem,
our emergency services wouldn't know where to go. So the street that had the fewest houses on it were the ones that got to choose what new name they had. And that man came to city council and cussed me and carried on and said, I don't want to change my checking account. I've lived at this house for 47 years, but we changed the street name. And it hurt.
Sure.
But, sometimes those things are not popularity things.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I learned. Another thing is that you have to be tough, but you have to be fair, and you can never lose yourself. And a lot of people said, well, what were some of the best things you ever did when you were mayor? And I said, the best things I ever did when I was mayor are things that people will not know. The people that I was able to help, and this is my favorite story that I will tell now because I've been out of office 14 years. There were people who actually came to City Hall who couldn't pay their electric bill. They just couldn't. They didn't have the money, and so they came. Well, my office was upstairs. So by the time they worked their way upstairs, they were pretty strung out. But I had a system. So I had a guy in collections, Vince Wong, who's now at the county.
Yeah.
Vince was down in collections, and he would message me that a couple was on their way up. And I said, okay, send me their record. So I would have their record in my hand, and I would see that they had paid their bill just about every time. They had just fallen on hard times. So they would come in my office and I would sit with them and they'd say, we just can't buy our medicine and pay our electric bill. And I said, well, let me run this again. Let me see what this says again, because we're going to run farther back, maybe 2 or 3 years. So I'd go to my secretary and I'd say, run it again at a zero balance. So she would run it again and hand me the copy with a zero balance. And I'd say, something strange must have happened. You must have overpaid at some point. I said, a few years ago, you might have paid twice in 1 month. And they said, oh, no, we're very stringent about how we pay our bills. I said, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you might have had a good month, but you must have double paid because you have a zero balance. And they would just look at me in amazement, and they'd say, wow, okay, all right. And they'd wander out the door, and I'd walk to my secretary, and I'd say, how much do I write the check for? And I get emotional thinking about that because those aren't the things that people need to know.
Yeah.
But because I was in that particular position,
you were able to.
I was able to because they had been diligent about paying their bills. I mean, there were people that, fell off the map a lot that didn't get that kind of sympathy. Yeah. But those are the kinds of things to me that were some of the most important things.
Yeah, my experience in the community too, and even here at our business is there were people, there's a super small percentage, super small percentage, that will take advantage of that goodwill. But you can't let that small percentage keep you from doing those things that you're talking about, right? And we do, and we try to remember that here. We even have an occasional customer or organization I'm involved with will try to take advantage of the system or what we're trying to accomplish. But so many times I've seen people get frustrated with that. I say, you know what, you can't worry about the one out of a 500 and forget the 499 that we're helping.
Well, we could do another whole podcast on the homeless issue and all that too, but we won't.
Yeah, right.
There's not enough time in the day.
Right. But so, listen, I appreciate you sharing that. Because we do have these lessons.
It's been so long that I feel like I can tell that story now. But my husband would say, the little bit of money you make being mayor, do you realize you give it all away? And I said, do you realize how much joy that gives me?
Yeah. You know what? It's okay. I've learned that too. I think when I was younger, I was almost like, well, we shouldn't feel good serving the community or serving others. It's okay. It's okay to feel good doing that. I mean, I think that's what we're charged with. You mentioned
sometimes it feels better doing it in secret.
Yeah. You mentioned First Methodist Church, right?
Yeah.
I've been, 27 years I've been a member, my wife and I have, and kids grew up there. And, that's that being a downtown church, that's what we're charged with, right? Is doing those things.
Well, I believe our mission field is right outside our door.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. Absolutely.
I think the Literacy Council, I was chairman of the Literacy Council when they negotiated with the church to build the Literacy Council in the old
Wesley Center.
Not only was I chairman of the administrative board, but I was chairman of the Literacy Council at the same time. So we negotiated that out.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's so many connections, right? When you talk about those type of things. So, what about post being mayor? What are some of the things you've been involved with? I don't know the timing of I know you were instrumental with the Education Foundation.
Well, I was, but being mayor does not give you a salary.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, it gave you enough to pay people's electric bills and get my hair fixed. But after I was mayor, during the time that I was mayor, I was still working for Keep America Beautiful and traveling. I was still the Education Foundation director. I was the director of the Education Foundation for 20 years.
And wasn't that when it started too, though, or am I wrong about that?
No, it had started a few years prior.
Okay.
But it had been basically operated by Gaston County Schools Administration, but it was a freestanding nonprofit.
Okay.
I didn't work for the schools, but I raised money for the schools.
Understood.
So I was doing Education Foundation, Keep America Beautiful. My good friend Martha Burris and I started a consulting business called Leading by Design, and we did facilitations for elected officials. We did retreats. We did strategic planning. We did that. And then I had another job. Doing something else. I don't remember, but I had 4 jobs at one time.
Yeah, you've facilitated a couple of strategic planning sessions with nonprofits. I've been on their boards.
Sure.
Yeah. Over the years. It's been a few years, but yeah. trying to think. Community Foundation, maybe was that the last one, or United
could have
Way,
been
or
United
United Way?
Way.
I think it was United Way,
United Way.
actually. Yeah. So, well, speaking of the Education Foundation, I'm actually on the board now.
Yeah, wonderful.
And we actually have a board meeting today, actually.
Well, what's wonderful about that is that, I had that position for 20 years. And when I knew that I was going to retire, I decided that when I turned 70, that I wasn't going to get a paycheck anymore, that I was going to decide to retire. And so I told the board that I was going to leave. And so they had the foresight enough to bring Amy Spencer on. And so she and I worked shoulder to shoulder for a year.
That's helpful.
And that was generous because by the time I stepped away, she already had gone through a whole year. And she had a totally different sphere of influence.
Right.
And that's what I was proud of, is the fact that, I had my sphere of influence. But when you pass on something that's special to you, you pass it on to someone who knows, who has another sphere of influence, who's going to grow it. And she's just done gangbusters, which thrills me to death. Plus, we had a lot of fun working together.
Yeah, and she's been on, I can't remember which episode it was, but she's been on talking with us about the Education Foundation, too. So, yeah, it's a great organization, obviously well known for mostly for the big event that's in the spring.
I just dreamed that up one day. I was watching Jeff Foxworthy, and I thought, I wonder if we could do that for Gaston County Schools. And, we organized it, but I had no idea what the sound level was going to be that first night.
And Jennie's talking about, are you smarter than a Gaston County fifth grader, which is, if you've never been, you will know, you go once and you'll know immediately what she's talking about. Yes.
When we started giving out earplugs to everybody that showed up, the day that you showed up dressed like Darth Vader, I was worried about somebody dangerous coming in because you were in a mask.
I
remember walking up to you and approaching you.
You're not supposed to do that on school property. Yeah.
But it worked out great.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, and that was the Gaston's Great. That was when we recorded the Gaston's Great.
Exactly, because Jesse was the MC that night.
Yeah, yeah. That turned out to be
when you're an old rat in the barn, you can think back to lots of different things and remind people of things maybe they don't want to remember. But you talk about the 4 jobs that I had and post-mayor. That was traumatic for me because I stopped everything at one time.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of nightgown days. That's what I called nightgown days, where I was just sitting there and I didn't have an office to go to any longer. And I was just there. And I thought, what am I going to do with myself?
What now?
And so I told David, my husband, I said, I need a sabbatical. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I need to go away for a month. He said, why? I said, I need to reinvent myself. And he really thought I had lost it. But I had picked out a little place on the Mobile Bay, a little town called Fairhope, which is my favorite place. And I rented a cottage, and I went there for 1 month just to pray and read and write and go to Rotary down there and just reinvent myself. And I told David, I said, when I come back, I don't know that I'll be a different person, but I think I'll be a better person. And I just reevaluated my life and wrote a tremendous amount. That probably will be a novel one day, but a lot of people are going to have to die first. But in doing that, I started thinking about the people that I was grateful for. And I started making a list of all the people that had inspired me in my lifetime, including children that I had taught in preschool, or my Sunday school teachers, or people that I really cared about. And I wrote down about 86 people. And every day I'd write 5 or 6 thank you notes to those people. And I'd mail them. Because I was reading too many obituaries where I'd say, I never told them I loved them. I never told them how I felt about them. And so I wrote 86 thank you letters while I was there. And when I came back, I was a better person. And it gave me an opportunity to reevaluate what I wanted to do in the community. And I came back a better person, and I was recharged. And it's the best thing I ever did for myself.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate to community. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of mentors. And what you just described is something that I've read a lot about. And I've done a little bit of that, not to that scale of thinking individuals, but man, before you know it, it can be too late, right? I mean, so
it could be too late.
Yeah, and then the second piece, what I heard you talking about is that reinvention. I think my experience is that it's okay to do that. And if you're fortunate enough to live long enough, I think you actually might reinvent yourself multiple times. And
I think so.
And can, because, like the person I am at 55 versus say 25 before marriage and kids, college, high school, I'm a completely different person. I view the world differently. My definition of success is different. What I'm doing day to day is different. Even here, I've been fortunate enough to be able to do different things and reinvent myself, community, church, whatever, right? And so I greatly appreciate you saying that, because I don't think I've heard anybody on 171 previous episodes really talk about that specific thing. So that's something that, you know what, if it's okay for Jennie Stultz to reinvent herself, then it's okay for anybody else to do that.
It takes a lot of guts to do that. First
it
of all,
does.
to convince your family that you're going off for a month. And David said, well, I'll just hang out with you for a few days. And I said, no, I'm doing this all by myself. I was in a town where I didn't know anybody. And so I had to do that.
Yeah.
I had to be introspective. But,
And did you go by yourself?
I went just by well, David drove me down there because he thought I was going to be staying in a van down by the river. I mean, he really did, because I remember packing my stuff, and he said, you need to take a gun? I said, do you think I'm staying in a van down by the river? And so we go driving up. He drives me down there, but I had a plane ticket for him to go home. And we drive up to this beautiful house on the bluff overlooking the Mobile Bay, and this precious little cottage, and this family with their dogs and their kids come out, and David said, I think you're going to be okay.
Oh, that's good.
And so I put him on a plane, and I spent the rest of the time on my own.
No, I think that's terrific. Yeah.
Well, and another thing that I do intentionally is when I really care about somebody, and the other person that I know that does this is Natalie Tyndall. And Natalie says, Jennie, I want to be you when I grow up. And I said, but Natalie, I want to be you when I grow up. But Natalie shares that joy, and when she cares about you, she makes no bones about telling you that.
That's true.
And I do the same thing. And I think of people that we have lost in the last few months, and when I find out about it, I say, oh, they knew I loved them. And
yeah, that's important.
Yeah. And, well, of course, I think of Teet, who we just lost today. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time visiting him and sending him Father's Day notes and those kinds of things, because he was my father figure. My dad had died, my uncle had died, and Teet was the one who kept me in line and would question me. And he was madder than the devil when we rebuilt the Garland Center, the old courthouse. It had burned. He and Bob Adams came into my office when I was mayor, and they were mad as wet hens. They both had on little pork pie hats. And they came in, they had all these notes written on a little square envelope. They'd had breakfast together. And they were telling me all the reasons why we shouldn't rebuild that old building, that old burned out building. And I said, well, first of all, we're going to get historic tax credits, and we're going to get some money to build it. Well, anyway, you're not supposed to be doing it. And I said, well, we're trying to make it easier for people to do business with the city and come to one place. Well, that's still not good enough. It's an old building. It needs to be torn down. I said, well, and then another thing is we're going to name it after Jack Garland. And they said, okay, well, have a good day. That's pretty good.
Well, for our listeners, we're recording this, October 22nd, and right before we started recording, Jennie got a note from someone in the Pearson family. So, and we had a great discussion beforehand, because I've had the good fortune for 20 plus years to be able to sit occasionally with Teet and Joe at Rotary and just listen and learn a lot, and served on some boards with him over the years as well. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up, because those, gosh, I don't want to overstep myself, but those icons, those people that I've grown up seeing, including you, seeing how you, what's the word? I use this phrase in other podcast episodes as, y'all are just homers for Gaston County. You want what's best for Gaston County, and you do things to try to make the county and our community better. And listen, that's required. You got to have people doing those things in our community, or it's just the same old, same old.
Well, and and they're doing it into their hundreds.
That's right.
Into their hundreds. When I was running for office, and I asked Teet about my running for office, he said, "Well, don't you think you're a little bit young?" And I said, well, Teet, I'm 53. How old do I need to be? And he said, you're 53.
Oh, that's funny.
And I said, yes, sir. I said, you're still sitting around those board tables. I said, because I'm there with you. And I said, when are you guys going to pass the baton? You know what? They never really passed the baton.
Right.
They held the other end of it because sometimes you were falling and you need to be held up by the other end of that baton.
Well, there also got to be people around to pass it to.
You're exactly right.
Right. I mean, that can be a scary, that can be a kind of a scary and uncertain thing. So,
well, that's my legacy, though. I've told people, I raise a lot of money, and I don't have money. I don't have money. But I've told people that I was raising money with, I said, my goal is to grow people. I like to grow people. And when I was mayor, I had a youth council of high school kids who some lived in basements, some lived in mansions, some got, Moorhead scholarships, some are waiters and waitresses, but they grew me.
right.
And so if I can't be wealthy enough to fund buildings and things like that, if I can grow people, I feel like I've made my contribution.
Yeah, that's a terrific legacy, right? And you mentioned earlier about some of the kids, when you were running for mayor, they were old enough to vote then. I had a similar experience, to First Methodist Church. I coached through the youth sports program for 10 or 12 years, and a lot of the kids have graduated college now. And it's so I'll occasionally see one of them, and they'll still call me coach or whatever.
You're right.
I mean, that is so rewarding, and they don't look at me like, yeah, you were that jerk of a coach. We'll have a conversation. They remember it was fun. I mean, of course, I got more out of that than they did. I'm sure.
Don't we though?
Yeah. So, Jennie, I'm afraid we could talk for another 5 or 6 hours, but looking back at this whole experience that brought you to today or where you are now, is there something looking back? It could be as mayor, professionally, some of the community organizations you've been involved with. There's something that stands out that you look back and say that you're most proud of, or you're like, something occurred that you were involved with. So that's why I do what I do. I know it might be hard to narrow down.
Well, it is because I served as mayor in probably the most difficult decade that I could have served in, because I was elected in 1999. 2000 was euphoric. We won All-America City. I ran unopposed. It was just euphoric. 2001, 9/11.
Yeah.
And I'm mayor. And I'm being called in to sit with all these emergency folks to determine what the next shoe might be, because we thought it would be Charlotte. We were pretty sure it might be Charlotte.
Uncertainty, chaos.
Second largest financial center, 2 nuclear power plants.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking, wait, whoa. And David calls me and he said, we're on our way to the mountains. And I said, I can't go.
Yeah.
So that was a tough time. People were coming out of that. And, of course, everybody's trust level, people were worried, that kind of thing. And then in 2007 and 2008, the economy crashed.
Yep. We
wanted to rebuild downtown. Well, there wasn't a nickel's worth of private money that was going into downtown. So we helped build the Rotary Pavilion. We built the conference center using hotel motel tax. We did what we could to kind of keep the economy going. And it was a very difficult time. But also, I'm not a really religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. And there's a Bible verse in the book of Esther that says, for such a time as this. And I really do think that the time that I was supposed to be in office was during that difficult time to try to keep people's heads up. So that was a learning experience for me. And I took a class where I had an opportunity to go to Harvard to a JFK government school for a month. And one of our professors said, leadership is like being on the dance floor. When you're on the dance floor, you're smiling, you're engaged, you listen to the music, you're kind of chatting up with somebody else, everything's going on, everything's cool. But you need to go up on the balcony. And when you go up on the balcony and you look down, you see who's not dancing. You see who hasn't been asked to dance, or who's not engaged, or who's not involved, or who's dancing but not really happy about it. And he said, you're not a good leader unless you get up on the balcony. And I think at this stage in my life, now I'm 78 years old, so at this stage in my life, I'm on the balcony a lot because I'm trying to see who's down there that needs to be dancing or needs to be happier about where they are.
Yeah, I'm a big leadership study guy, and one of the guys I follow is a guy named Jocko Willink, and he has a great book called Extreme Ownership. And anyway, but one of his things is that he's an ex-military guy, but he calls it you have to detach, and it's the same concept. So you can look at the bigger view. You can see who because when you're a leader, you can't focus on, say if you're leading 20 people, you need to know what all's happening with all 20 people. Right, it's not just the one that you interact with the most, or whatever. So that's that good leadership. You can get caught up in whatever's great happening that day, or whatever's the worst thing is happening that single day, right? And lose sight of the bigger picture and the longer term stuff that's going on around you. So that balcony metaphor, that's a good one.
Balcony metaphor,
that's a great one.
And then what really frustrates me and makes me sad about politics today is that it's not about serving the people. I mean, too many times it has just gotten out of control, and people have different ideas about being in political office and what it does for them. And, that frustrates me. So, I guess I'm old rat in the barn, and I'm like Teet saying, aren't you a little bit young to be doing these things? I'm kind of living in his footsteps, but I guess being on the balcony is really important because then you can help connect people.
Yeah, that's great. That's a terrific image, and I appreciate that. What's next for Jennie Stultz?
Well, I'm really busy right now because I have all my teeth, and I speak in complete sentences, and I'm a great-grandmother.
Oh, wow, great-grandmother.
I have 4 great-grandchildren.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That are 5, 4, 2, and 1. So that's one of my...
I assume you're spoiling them as...
I don't spoil
possible.
them. I spoil them with experiences. I mean, we have an only child, Amy, and she said, my parents never spoiled me with material things. They spoiled me with experiences.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
And so I don't give gifts. I give experiences. And so that is my family is extremely important to me, like everybody's is. But I'm working with the Dream Center Academy because it's the greatest
organization.
It's the greatest volunteer organization I've ever served because we're growing young people.
Yes.
We're watching kids who probably would not graduate from high school who are now graduating and going on to college and going to trade school. Yeah.
Roxanne was on, within the past 2 years, and she had a few of her kids from the first graduating class.
Yeah.
And it's one of our most listened to and watched episodes because they were impressive kids.
Well,
yeah, and they really were.
That inspires me because I help grow people. So as long as I'm growing people, even if it's little ones, little great-grandchildren.
And I think our youth are not exposed enough to that leadership and that what's possible,
Well, you've said it. It's what's possible because they have a realm. I can remember when I was mentoring in the Gaston County schools, and I had 2 young girls that I mentored, and both of them dropped out of high school, and both of them got pregnant. And I told the high school principal, I said, I'm going to quit. I've been a failure. And she said, I'm glad you feel that strongly about yourself. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, how much time do you spend with these kids? And I said, an hour or 2 a week. And she said, they have the rest of their lives. She said, but you have to use this analogy. And this changed my life. She said, you grew up playing football rules. There's a certain number of people on a field in a football team, and certain goals and certain ways to score. But these kids grew up playing basketball rules with a different number of people on the court and different ways to score and different ways to succeed. You cannot walk on a basketball court playing your football rules.
Interesting. Wow.
And by doing that,
that's pretty profound.
When you want to change a young person and they have grown up with basketball rules, it's really not fair. Now, you can open the door to some football rules,
sure,
and they can take them or leave them, but that had a lot to do with it.
And that's that classic, I don't know how to describe it, but that kind of projecting our own experience on others and expecting them to just understand. And well, what do you mean that? How your experience is not the same as mine?
I can remember people saying to me, how do you know about being poor or being hungry? And I said, we were poor. Yeah. We were hungry when we were in college.
Yeah, that's interesting. Gosh, there are some questions I want to make sure we cover before we finish, but is there anything that I haven't asked that I should have asked? Anything you want to make sure you say? Of course, before we finish, we'll give you the last word before we close this episode out. Your last limited word, because we don't have a 5-hour, we have a 5-hour time limit, Jenny, but anything that I haven't asked that I should have asked that you want to make sure we cover?
Not that I can really think of. I think you picked me clean. Pretty.
All right. So remembering this is we're trying to share reasons why Gaston County is such a great place. And so from your perspective, what the overall just broader sense, why would you say Gaston County is such a special place?
Well, it grew me. This county grew me. There were people who believed in me and expected things of me that I didn't think were in me. My high school history teacher was Helen Marvin, and I was not a good history student, and because I was in love with this guy sat next to me. But as an adult, she kept saying, "You've got to promise me that you'll run for office in my lifetime." And I said, "Helen, I was not a good student." She said, "You've got to promise me you'll run."
Interesting.
And Fred Smyer was my Sunday school teacher, because I grew up at First Presbyterian, and he would write me letters to tell me how much he believed in me. There were people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself.
Right.
And I think that's one thing about Gaston County, is that we believe in each other. And along the way, there were a group of people around a table that said, "You need to be mayor," that I never imagined, and it was never on my radar screen. So I think that's one thing that we do believe in, is growing each other. And that's why that sculpture is out there in front of the Rotary Pavilion that tells a story of a textile mill, and then a group of people that are passing on wishes that are in a little girl's basket that float around through that park that say perseverance and truth and faith. All those things are just a composite of who we are.
Right.
And the people like you and Joel who come back home, you could have gone anywhere in the world. There were the Efer family, the other families, the Pearsons, that have all come back here, that all of us come back and invest in our communities. Is what makes Gaston great, is that we're willing to invest, not necessarily monetarily, but through our faith and through our service and through our belief in each other.
Wow. Maybe we should drop the mic and stop the podcast after that. Gee, that was terrific. But a couple more.
I can pass the collection plate.
a couple more questions. So this is a question I like to ask of our guest. Knowing what you know now, what advice? There might be some 20-year-olds listen. So what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Well, I had to think about my 20-year-old self. My 20-year-old self was married, working in a beer distributorship so that my husband could finish college, so that I could finish college at the age of 31. Is that expect difficult things to happen. Don't always think that the world's going to be just laid out for you. In fact, I'm really glad. I'm not grateful that I lost my dad early. I'm not grateful that I had an addicted brother. I'm not grateful that I had a lot of difficulties, but I let them make me instead of break me.
Right.
And I think as a 20-year-old, the world is so large compared to what it was when I was 20 years old, is that the world can swallow you up. I think you've got to have mentors, you've got to have role models, and you've got to be true to yourself.
You can even search those out too.
Yeah, and people that were my enemies, I called them my enemies when I ran for office. It was just because I was in politics. They'd say, you were tough, but you were fair.
Yeah.
And that's the best compliment that anybody could pay me.
Yeah, I think it was, I'm paraphrasing, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who one of his I'm a big quotes guy.
Yeah.
And I think he said, I'm not, it's not going to be exactly right, but basically said hardships can prepare ordinary people for extraordinary things.
Well, and I think our young people don't expect hardships.
Yeah, this I have a matter of fact. I think that was the quote that I got today from. I subscribe to multiple little daily things.
I read your post.
And well, thank you.
Your messages.
One I think today's was from C.S. Lewis, and so the topic this week from that one is resiliency, and I do think there's a resiliency opportunity we have with young people today.
I think young people think a lot of things are temporary. If this doesn't work, then I'll try something else. If this marriage doesn't work, I'll try something else. If this job doesn't work, and although I think young people tend to like move on more, as long as they're moving on and moving up.
That's fair. Progress, some type of progress. So you mentioned mentors. So is there someone, or it could be more than one person that, looking back, who really made a big impact on you professionally, leadership, community perspective, someone that, I mean, you've mentioned a lot of people already. So you may be somebody you've already mentioned. But
they're obviously the father figures, that World War II group, the group of 24 were all my father figures. And I think today they're gone.
Yeah.
But ironically, the one person that I think about that has inspired me the most was a little girl who was in my youth council, and she was Hispanic, and I wanted her to be on the All-America City team because she was part of the group that worked with teenage dropouts. They were working on that, and she was just a little spitfire. And so I said, I want you to go on the All-America City team. And so she came to my office the next day, and she said, Mayor Jennie, I can't go. I can't be on the team. And I said, why is that? She said, I'm not documented, and I can't travel. And I said, okay, so what can we do about that? And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, let's work on it. So I called Sue Myrick, and I said, I need to get this kid documented. What do we need to do? And so long story short, she became documented. She graduated from UNC Charlotte. She's a flight attendant, and she's married to a maxillofacial surgeon. But she couldn't go to school because she didn't have the money. Her daddy was a shade tree mechanic. Her mother was a maid. They had been coffee barons, but the drug lords were going to make them ship the drugs in their coffee and said, if you don't do it, we'll kill you. And so they escaped.
Another thing we have no perspective on.
Well, this child persevered, but she inspired me so much.
Sure. That's resiliency.
That I just think, she was a dreamer, but she did all the right things to make it happen. And I call her my Hispanic daughter. She calls me her gringo mother. But when I was talking to a friend of ours, David Ratchford, one day, and I said, I got to go. We were raising money for hospice. And I said, I got to go help this kid write her speech. She was president of the senior class at Ashbrook.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And I said, I got to go help this kid, make a speech. And he said, who is it? And I told him, and I kind of told the story. And he said, what's she going to do? And I said, well, she's been accepted to Western Carolina, but she can't go. And he said, do you love her? And I said, yeah, David, I really love her. And he said, well, if you love her, I love her. I'll pay for her school.
Good gracious.
Now, when you talk about inspiration, when you talk about how things happen.
Well, that's connections and relationships. And
I call them God winks.
Yeah.
They're God winks.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about inspiration, sometimes you would think somebody who'd been a CEO of a bank or somewhere up there, but it was a little Hispanic girl who wanted to go to All-America.
Well, it's those day-to-day things, too, that we undervalue, that are often the impactful things. Yeah. We think it's got to be some gigantic thing that happens, but it's really not. It's either the small things, and then progress happens with the accumulation of all those small things, and that's how real impact is made, in at least my experience.
But I can't go without talking about my husband, who is that shy guy that I invited to the football game, who is like a fisherman, and he sits on the bank, and I'm the lure, and I get way out, and I get over my head, and I get gobbled up, and he just reels me right back in. And he's the one that's kept the lights on for me when I get home in the middle of the night. So, you talk about inspiration. He's been the one that's kind of kept me,
Well, that's good. I appreciate you saying that.
Falling off the ledge.
Well, yes, and again, I've known both of you for a good long time, and I think for both of you, I just think of, I don't know, transparency and integrity. Just like I said, the homer for Gaston County, and someone who are people who develop relationships, and if you say something, that either one of y'all say something, you can count on it.
Well, there's just no pretense.
Yeah,
pretense
that's
is very
fair.
difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a better way. That's a better way to say it than my engineering mind trying to come up with some vocabulary.
No, I think you have a right brain
that
too.
I don't own. So, Jennie, this has been really good. So, any last words before we close out this episode?
Well, having watched almost every one of your podcasts and followed those podcasts, and because my whole mantra has been being proud of your community.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for this podcast. I'm grateful for the things that you have brought out to the community that we need to know about.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Because we need to keep being reminded. Everybody needs to be reminded about the good things. With a quote from John Kennedy, there's nothing wrong with this country that's not right with this country. And
right.
I feel like the same way with our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so thank you for keeping us.
Well, you're welcome. And it's been a good mission, and I've met so many great people. A lot of them I already knew. I didn't know their stories, but frankly, in the last 4.5 years, it's helped me. Matter of fact, and talk about God winks, the first episode we recorded was literally the week before we had that shooting here. So the timing, you look back and you wonder about timing of things.
Yeah.
I mean, the odds of that occurring. So I immediately had something to do that I could focus on to remind me that there are good things happening around us, right?
Yeah.
Because there was a time period after that I thought, this is...
Well, and the whole community ached.
Oh, yeah.
The whole community ached for you, and that's another thing. Our community aches for everybody.
No question. I agree.
And we haven't forgotten.
Yeah, that talk about that hardships and resiliency, and the lesson I took from that was our community, both locally and even in a broader sense, our HVAC professional community, even from all over the country, but mostly here locally, really, they lifted us up during that time. So, but
and sometimes the most bizarre, unexpected thing in the world that'll happen to you. That's why I talk to those 20-year-olds. Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, listen, Jennie, I appreciate you and your family and all you've done for our community. I appreciate you taking the time to come share with us. We're on hour number 3, it looks like. I'm kidding. We're not quite there. Again, but I do appreciate that. And I do try to share a quote every week. And I didn't really intentionally pick this quote, but it kind of ties into kind of what we were just talking about. And I picked a Henry Ford quote, and it's the one, typically they line up with the quotes, I'm not a big social media guy. I do twice a week. I put something on social media. On Mondays, I typically put a quote and a thought. And then on Thursday or Fridays, I just reshare the links for this podcast. That's all I do ever on social media. If there's something important I need to see, my wife will tell me about it, but I need to go find out about it. But Henry Ford said, "Failure is simply an opportunity to start again, this time more intelligently." So there's so many lessons that we learn that we think, oh, this is the end of the world, this is the worst. But then oftentimes if we look back and, what do we learn from it? That's kind of that question I asked about, your experiences and your leadership lessons, and can we make progress from those and learn something from them and get on with it, right? Well, we can always reinvent ourselves. Absolutely. Reinvention is a great word, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people, that's a good lesson, a good message, to hear, that it's okay to do that. Well, you've given me an opportunity to share some little known facts about me. A lot of people just have the
One little girl asked me, they said, "Are you the mayor?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Your name's Jennifer?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Are you Jennifer Lopez?" And I said, "I'm twice the woman that Jennifer Lopez is."
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. That's a good perspective too, right?
I don't think I want to reinvent myself as J-Lo, though.
Yeah, that's funny, though. So, again, Jenny, I appreciate your time. And as always, to our listeners, thanks for taking the time to listen to today's episode. Please continue to spread the word if you can about the podcast, I think. Please don't hesitate to contact us here at our email address, which is podcast@gastonsgreat.com. We are always looking for suggestions for future podcast topics and guests. You can find the podcast and subscribe at the website, gastonsgreat.com, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And please follow us on all social media platforms. Thanks again to Jenny for being our guest today. Gaston's Great is produced and brought to you by Rachel Cowart from GSM Services. I'm your host, Stephen Long. Thanks again for hanging out with us, and please keep coming back to hear more reasons why Gaston's great.